Michael slammed the door as hard as he could. He was on edge. More than 2 weeks ago, he bought a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. But the staff of the company still couldn't start working properly. Today was the last time he talked to them. If they would continue to work so badly, he'd have to change the entire staff. He couldn't understand. Do people really like discussing their bad wages more than starting to work hard, getting promoted, and getting a better paycheck? The first time he thought people were unhappy and just wanted to work, but today he was convinced of the opposite. It's their way of life to complain about life and do nothing. Michael got in his car. He thought about it and picked up the phone. "Hey, Max, I need you to cover for me for a week. I need to focus on my new company." "Yeah, thanks, Max." Max was his friend, colleague, and partner. They had started their business together, fought together for their place in the market, and now they were successful businessmen. 3 years ago, they split up their joint company and made it into two. Max was handling the supply of goods and raw materials, and Michael was in manufacturing. But they split their business not because they began to quarrel, but because they wanted to avoid quarrels in the future. Each of them had his own business, his own company. They did not depend on each other, but always helped each other. Both of them knew the whole business process, so if Max needed to go somewhere, Michael could easily help out at his company, and vice versa. Michael didn't buy this small company because he wanted to make a lot of money from it. It was just because it was located in his hometown. The town was small and hardly ever developed. Michael knew he couldn't get a lot of money there, and when he bought the company, he did it not because he had some fantastic business plan, but because of nostalgia. But he had never seen such indifference of employees toward their work. People didn't get anything, but they were fine with it. They just thought that the world was not fair and that it was just useless to work hard. Michael was sure it was enough to change the manager, but realized he had to take care of everything himself. He started the car and thought about it. He had to find a place to stay for a week. Well, a week or two. He didn't want to stay at the local hotel. He knew from his past life that the conditions there were terrible. He had to find a good apartment. Michael pulled out of the parking lot. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the company employees looking at him with unkind looks. Michael drove around town, looking for any real estate agency. There's no way there were no real estate agencies there. He found one agency. The schedule on the door said they were open until 5 p.m. It was only 3 p.m., but the door was locked. He stared at the door in confusion. Well, what should he do now? It was ridiculous to go home to another city to spend the night and come back in the morning. He didn't notice when he drove into the yard he had lived in 8 years ago. He stopped. There's the building where he lived, and Tiffany lived in the one next to it. Michael tried to chase the memories away. Old ladies were sitting on the bench. Michael couldn't believe his eyes. He saw Margaret, the menace of the neighborhood. She looked much older now, but even 8 years ago Michael thought she was 100 years old. He got out of the car and noticed that piercing look already staring at his car. Nothing had changed. Margaret was always watching everything. Michael walked over saying hello. "Hello, Margaret. I'm so glad to see you." She squinted, thinking, and suddenly smiled. "Michael, is that you?" Michael was astonished. Old Margaret remembered everything. He smiled too. "Yes, that's me." "I immediately recognized you. Why did you come here? I heard you're a successful businessman now." Michael sat down next to her. Yes, I'm a successful businessman, and I always thought I could do anything, but I couldn't find an apartment in this town. It's like the whole town is wiped out." "Why do you need an apartment here, Michael?" "I bought a company in your town. I have to organize everything here, and to do that I need to stay here for a while, and I don't want to go to a hotel. I don't think anything has changed there." "Michael, you don't have to look for a place to live. Stay at my place. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. There's enough space." "I don't want to disturb you." "Come on, Michael. I'm sure you'll be at work all the time. Besides, I live alone, and I'd really enjoy your company." Michael couldn't believe his luck. He didn't really want to live in this building, but that's fine. No one he knew was here anymore. The most important thing was that Tiffany was not here. She left first. and he left after her when he realized she wasn't joking, but really had left him. Margaret said goodbye to her friends and headed home. "Let's go. You will tell me about your life over a cup of tea." After a while, she and Michael sat at the table, and Margaret was asking him about the business, about his plans. "But why do you need this company? It's been useless for a long time. Besides, the same people have been working there for years, and they're used to getting paid for nothing. They're lazy, they're not used to making an effort, and you can't change that." Michael replied, "Margaret, times have changed. Nowadays, no one will pay those who don't want to work, and neither will I. If they don't want to work, I'll find other employees, young and promising ones, the ones who need the money." She shook her head. "Well, maybe you're right. Times are really different now." "Margaret, how much do I have to pay you to stay here?" She shook her head in the negative. "Come on, Michael. You don't have to pay me. You bought a lot of groceries, and at least I don't feel so bored alone." She didn't even want to listen to his objections and just walked him to his room. "You can stay in this room. The couch is wide and comfortable, and the linens are in the closet. What time are you going to the office in the morning?" "At 7 o'clock. "All right. Get some rest." Michael pulled his laptop out of his bag and made his bed. He wanted to work but was tired today and just went to bed. In the morning, the alarm clock woke him at 6 a.m. Michael got up and headed for the bathroom. In the kitchen, Margaret was already cooking something. It smelled like some kind of pastry. He got out of the shower and headed into the kitchen. There were scrambled eggs and puffed pancakes on the table. Michael was very surprised. "Is this for me? I don't eat breakfast in the morning." "That's your biggest mistake. You go to work hungry, so you have no energy. You know that breakfast is the most important meal. Try to eat breakfast and your day will go differently." Michael smiled. He knew from his childhood that arguing with Margaret was useless. He thought he wouldn't be able to eat anything, but during his conversation with Margaret, he didn't notice that he ate it all. Margaret smiled as Michael looked at the empty plates with a surprised look. "Oh, no, I ate too much. I won't be able to work now for sure." "Oh, you're mistaken, young gentleman. After a good breakfast, you will be able to work as effectively as never before. You'll see." Michael arrived at the office at 7:30. The workday started at 8 o'clock. He pulled the doorknob, but the door was locked. He tried to press the bell button. No answer. Strange. He pays for security guards to be here 24 hours a day. 10 minutes to 8, the guard arrived. "Excuse me, I believe you're supposed to be here around the clock. After all, I pay for around-the-clock services." "But no one comes here at night, so why would I waste my time here?" "But you're paid to be here at night, too." "So what? There's no one here at night." Michael realized it was no use talking to the guard. He walked through the open door and entered the office. The human resources, security, and logistics offices were on the first floor. 8 a.m. No one was in the office. At 8:15, the first employee showed up. By 9 o'clock, almost all the employees had arrived. Michael asked everyone to come to the reception area. The people were nervous. No one expected the new owner to come to the office so early, so there wasn't much of a rush to get to work. They haven't had any meetings in a while. He's probably going to fire them all. In fact, that's what he wanted to do. But then he decided to see if anybody could do anything at all. At the meeting, Michael said that everything was going to change. Not only the working process, but also the payment system. After the meeting, he invited the head of security and the woman from human resources to his office. He told the head of security department about the incident this morning and warned him that he would no longer tell them how to work, but simply change the guards. And there was a long conversation with the human resources manager, and he also reviewed each employee's personnel files. He was very active all day, had time to do a lot of things, and thought of Margaret with a smile. Wow. It was 4 p.m., and he didn't feel any fatigue or hunger. 3 days later, he fired almost half the staff. New people were coming in for interviews, and Michael realized one interesting thing. There were many young and enthusiastic people in this town, but they didn't believe that it was possible to live differently, that it was possible to earn a lot if you worked hard and made an effort to do it. In the evening, he told Margaret about his insights. She smiled. "Well, Michael, it's hard to change anyone's mind if they believe in something. That's the nature of human beings. Well, no, I understand that things can change. You understand that now, but what about before? What about before? And then Michael realized that the old lady remembered Tiffany and their love. He got gloomy. Years ago, he didn't seek the truth. He just pointed Tiffany to the door, and she didn't try to tell the truth. She left in silence. Well, later, Michael tried to talk to her, but it was too late. Tiffany left this town, and no one knew where she was going. She had deceived him, betrayed him. Her friend had told him she knew all about Tiffany, and it was such a coincidence that Michael felt like an idiot. He arrived home that day. Tiffany had been living with him for 3 months. He was so happy, but suddenly Heather came to him. She was the one who told him about Tiffany's behavior when he was away on a business trip. When he came home, the table was set. Tiffany was beautiful and cheerful, and she hurried to hug him. He looked at her and asked, "What are you celebrating?" "Michael, what's wrong with you?" "Pack up and leave. I don't want a woman like you in my house." "Michael, what are you talking about?" "What am I talking about? I've been told everything about you, absolutely everything." "And you believed it right away, without even asking me anything?" "And I don't have to ask you anything." Tiffany silently packed up and left. And 3 days later, he realized he hadn't even let her say a word. And anyone, even the most dangerous criminal, has a right to have the last word. But Tiffany had already left. And Michael, out of anger, began an affair with the same Heather. She liked him for a long time. She didn't try to hide it. However, this romance did not last long. He decided to leave this town. Everything here reminded him of Tiffany and his happiness. Heather yelled and cried, begging him to take her with him, but Michael had never loved her. He wasn't going to take her with him and continue this affair. The next day, Michael returned from work. He noticed Margaret sitting on the bench with the other old ladies. So he decided to say hello to them all and then go home. "Michael, is that you? Hello." He turned around. The same Heather was standing in front of him. "Heather, hello, how are you doing?" "I'm fine. I'm married, have a child, and how are you doing?" "I'm fine, but I don't have a family or a child." "You didn't marry Tiffany?" Heather looked at him in surprise. "How could I marry her? She cheated on me. You were the one who told me about it." "Michael, you're such a fool. I've always liked you, so I made up this lie about Tiffany. I didn't think you'd believe it." Heather walked away, and Michael looked after her with his mouth open. So Tiffany hadn't cheated on him, and he'd chased her away without even listening? The man turned around in confusion. Margaret had already approached him and was looking at him intently. "So that's why you and Tiffany broke up. Michael, you're such a fool." He realized that he was really an idiot, but there was nothing he could do about it. There was no going back. He noticed that the old woman was looking somewhere. He followed her gaze and saw a boy, about 7 years old, waving his hands and crying. And it was all completely silent. People couldn't hear him, so no one paid any attention to him. The boy saw someone looking at him and waved his hands even harder, pointing to the open hatch. Michael asked Margaret, "What is that boy doing?" "I don't even know. It's Richard. He's mute." "Mute, then. It makes sense why he's waving his hands silently." Michael rushed over to the boy. "Hey, what happened?" The boy pointed to the open hatch and mooed. Tears rolled down his cheeks. Michael turned on the flashlight on his phone and bent over the hatch. Old ladies from the bench were already rushing toward them. Down there, a little dog was shaking with fear and cold. It wasn't barking, just shivering and squealing. It was about 2 feet to the bottom of the pit, maybe a little more. Michael looked into the boy's eyes. "Is that your dog?" He nodded and cried even harder. Michael smiled. "Don't cry. You're a man. We'll get your dog now." He took off his jacket and held it out to Margaret, checked his pants pocket to make sure it was empty, and he couldn't lose anything, and put his feet down into the pit. It turned out that somewhere about 1 meter deep, there was a metal brace. This made the task of rescuing the dog much easier. Michael was covered in mud. The mud was black and sticky. He picked up the dog, who was shivering like it was sitting in a freezer. He had to put the dog under his shirt to keep his hands free. A few minutes later, Michael climbed out of the pit, and everyone was looking at him like he was a hero. He pulled the dog out from under his shirt and handed it to the boy. The boy immediately hugged the dog with tears of joy in his eyes. The dog licked the boy's face happily, and he started crying again. This boy reminded Michael of someone. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The boy was probably the son of one of Michael's childhood friends. He snuggled up to Michael. He held the dog with one hand and hugged Michael with the other. He couldn't thank him with words, so that's how he expressed his gratitude. When he left, Michael stared after him. Finally, he turned to Margaret. "I'm sorry I got so dirty. Will you let me into the apartment?" Margaret laughed. "Let's go home, hero. I may be old, but I have a modern washing machine." They headed toward the building. Michael's mood was just fine for the first time since he arrived here. At home, Michael did the laundry himself. Margaret had the latest model washing machine, and then they had dinner. No matter how hard Michael tried to get that boy out of his head, he couldn't. "Margaret, is this boy from around here?" Margaret looked at him strangely and then said, "Yes, he's local, from next door. His mother is always at work, so she gave him a friend in the form of a dog. He won't part with that dog. The other kids don't play with him. They only mock him and make fun of him, so this dog is his only friend." "But why is his mother always at work? Doesn't she have a husband?" "She doesn't have a husband, and Richard's a good guy. He's smart, but he's mute." "Has he always been like that?" "I don't know exactly, but they say not. They lived somewhere else before, not here. Something happened there, some kind of trouble, and he stopped talking after that. His mother took him to all kinds of doctors and got many loans, but the treatment isn't working. That's why this girl has to work 3 jobs, and this boy is only alone for half a day. Then their neighbor picks him up." Michael didn't know who the boy's mother was, but he felt that somehow the boy was stuck in his heart. He wanted to do something for him. He focused his thoughts on the boy and didn't notice that the old woman was looking at him intently. Then she grinned. "Michael, you look worried about something." "I'm just thinking. I have a friend who has a private children's clinic in the capital. There are excellent doctors there. People even come from other countries for consultations. We should take Richard there." "You need a lot of money for that. I told you. His mother works very hard to pay all the bills." Michael said nothing more. He didn't know what was going on in his head. But after dinner, he called his friend. "Tell me, is there any chance to help? A boy about 7 years old used to talk, and then something happened. Well, anyway, now he's mute. It's a typical case. It's hard to treat, but there's still a chance. Why do you ask? Is it someone you know?" "Well, yeah, it's the son of my friends." "Well, if it's your friend's son, come here any day. I'll make a 50% discount." "Thanks, friend. We'll discuss it together, and I'll call you." "Okay, but don't wait too long. The longer the boy doesn't talk, the less chance he has." Michael hung up the phone and thought about it. The treatment wasn't too expensive. It wasn't too expensive for Michael. And for that woman, it would be unaffordable. Why did he care so much about them? Michael couldn't answer, especially since he didn't even know Richard's mother. The next day, Michael arrived from work and immediately saw Richard. It was Sunday, but Richard was alone again. He was playing with his dog at the far end of the yard, away from the other kids. Margaret was sitting on the bench. Michael headed toward Richard. The boy noticed him and smiled. Once again, Michael had some feeling that the boy reminded him of someone. He should ask Margaret who his mother is. Maybe then this strange feeling will disappear. "Playing?" The boy nodded. Michael petted the dog. "What's your dog's name?" Richard immediately took a stick and drew some letters in the sand. It was the dog's name. Michael looked at Richard. "Is your mom home?" Richard shook his head negatively. Then he took Michael's hand and pointed to the number 8 on the clock. Now it was 7, which meant that his mother would be home in an hour. He said goodbye and headed home. Margaret saw him leaving and then also went home. She had to make dinner for the man. Over dinner, the old woman asked, "I saw that you tried to communicate with Richard. How is he? Why did you go to him?" "I don't know why. I wanted to help the boy, and I called my friend. He's ready to take him to the clinic right away." But will his mother accept an offer from a stranger? I think I should talk to her. Michael, don't think about it. Just go and talk to her. Help is such a good thing. People don't help each other much these days. But I'm afraid she'll refuse your help. If only rationality wins out, and she will think of Richard first. It's better to forget about pride when a child needs help. You're right, but you have no idea who his mother is, and you don't know how she'll take it. Well, I'll try to talk to that woman anyway. My friend said that his clinic has helped many children with the same problem. Richard has a chance. Michael stood up and headed for the exit. The old lady whispered, "May God help you." As Michael left the apartment, he realized he didn't know where to go and went back inside. "Margaret, what apartment do they live in?" "Apartment number 10. Michael took a step toward the exit and stopped. He froze. His head was pounding, his palms got sweaty, and he turned around. 10? Yes, Michael. Tiffany is Richard's mother. She came back here 3 years ago. Michael walked out of the apartment. He stopped in the yard. Tiffany is Richard's mother. What should he do? He knew that he certainly couldn't leave Richard without help now, but he also knew that Tiffany just wouldn't listen to him. After all, he had hurt her so unfairly. Michael approached the next building. He has to try. He has to help. He pressed the bell. The door swung open almost immediately, and Richard's eyes and the dog's eyes looked at him. "Richard, who's there?" Tiffany came out into the hallway. She hadn't changed much. She was just as beautiful, just as gentle as 8 years ago. She gained a few pounds, but it only made her more beautiful. "You? What are you doing here?" Richard gestured quickly, and Tiffany said, "So you're the one who saved the dog." "Tiffany, I know you're not happy to see me, but listen to me. I'm here to talk about Richard." Tiffany turned pale. "About Richard? Did Richard do something wrong?" "Oh, nothing. No, don't be frightened. You see, I have a friend in the capital. He has his own children's clinic. They deal with cases like this, and he says he can help Richard." Tiffany sat down on the couch. She wished more than anything else that her son could talk again. It was her fault. A few years ago, when they lived in another city, Tiffany had been driving with Richard sitting next to her. She was distracted and didn't notice a dog jumping under the wheels. When Richard saw it, he just stopped talking. For the boy, the dog's death was a terrible shock. At first, Tiffany thought it was just a shock. He'd be quiet for a day or two. But almost 4 years had passed, and nothing had changed. She felt guilty for messing up his life. "I heard about this clinic, but it's too expensive. We can't afford it. Tiffany, let me help you, please. If you let me, I'll pay for his treatment." 3 days later, Michael was leaving and taking Tiffany and Richard with him. They decided to take the dog with them. "Let the dog stay with me for a while. I hope it doesn't have time to eat all the furniture." Richard laughed, and even Tiffany smiled. It all happened very quickly and unexpectedly. Michael showed up out of the blue, immediately offering to go to this clinic. They had already sent all of Richard's tests and medical records to his friend by email. Michael parked outside the clinic. They got out of the car and headed for the entrance. Tiffany was very nervous, but Richard was looking around with curiosity. There was a huge children's playground in the clinic courtyard. Little patients went out there to play. Richard could not take his eyes off such a miracle. Michael knocked on the office door and came in. They embraced with each other, and he invited everyone to sit down. He examined Richard's medical record and asked Tiffany questions. She answered. Then he looked at Richard. "Well, let's not waste time talking. We'll do the treatment first, and then we'll talk." Richard smiled and nodded. Tiffany asked if she could stay with her son. "Sure, Michael ordered a private room for your son. You can stay with him as long as you like." He called, and a second later a nurse showed up in the office. "Show them room number 5, please." When Tiffany and Richard left, a friend looked at Michael and said, "Why did you hide the fact that you have a son for so long?" "A son? What son? What are you talking about?" "Are you serious? Isn't Richard your son? That's strange. He's an exact copy of you." And then Michael realized. He realized who Richard reminded him of. He reminded him of himself. Michael looked at the boy and saw himself as a child. He stood up. Then he sat down. "Michael, am I getting this right? Is he really your son? You just didn't know about it? Jeez, what an idiot I am. He immediately remembered that Tiffany had made a special dinner that day. Apparently, she wanted to tell him the news. And this is what he did to her. Tiffany would never forgive him. What should I do? Michael was confused. Well, you have to make your own decision. How did it happen that you didn't know anything? I chased her away that day. Her friend lied to me and I believed her. Yeah, it's a tough situation. Well, you have about a month to fix everything while they're here. At least try to make things right. Margaret was bored on the bench. Then suddenly she saw Michael's car. She got up and hurried toward it. Richard jumped out of the car. He had grown a lot, even though they had only been away for 2 months. Richard ran up to the old lady and said, "Hello." It was so sudden, so strange, so different, that the old lady started crying. "Oh, Richard, so they helped you." Michael was walking toward her, with Tiffany next to him. Margaret looked at Tiffany's face and immediately realized everything. They had made up. The woman was glowing with joy, her eyes sparkling, though she tried to hide it. Michael hugged the old lady like she was someone very close to him. "Margaret, we're here to invite you to the wedding. If you hadn't offered to stay at your place, probably I wouldn't have met Tiffany and Richard." The old woman cried, "I'm too old to go to wedding parties. What kind of guest am I?" "You are the most honored guest, Margaret. You knew from the beginning that Richard was my son, didn't you?" "It was strange that you didn't realize it right away. He looks so much like you." "Yeah, I kept wondering who he reminded me of. Margaret, I'll send a driver for you in 2 weeks. I won't take no for an answer." The wedding was in full swing. Michael decided to throw a big party. There were so many guests that they were tired of listening to congratulations. In the heat of the party, Tiffany turned pale and walked out of the hall. They were just standing near Margaret. Michael looked at the old lady in confusion. Margaret was silent, but her eyes could tell a lot. "What's wrong with her?" Michael wondered, turning to the old lady. Margaret smiled. "Well, at least Daddy will be there when the second baby is born." Michael stared at the old woman in astonishment, then smiled strangely and rushed after his wife. Now he wouldn't take a step away from her. He would be with her every second, every minute. He wouldn't miss a thing. It wouldn't be like the first time.